This is the Initiates Podcast. Here, we create space to explore the path of initiation as we reawaken the forgotten wisdom that resides within us all. I am your host and guide, Natalie Grace. Join me every Thursday for an enlightening exploration of contemporary spirituality. It's my honour to journey with you. Hello friends, thank you so much for joining me. On today's episode, I'm going to be talking about self-devotion. I'm going to be sharing the amazing pivotal role that a self-devotional practice has played in my recent healing journey and my transformation as I've emerged from my own recent dark night of the soul. I'm going to be expanding on my post-dark night journey, my experience with being diagnosed with an autoimmune condition, and how that experience empowered me and motivated me to transform not only my physical health, but my whole state of being. I'm then going to be walking you through my own self-devotional practice that I designed to enrich my life, and I'll be sharing the benefits that I experienced after undertaking this daily and weekly practice over a number of months. All right, let's journey. So over the past couple of episodes, together we've been journeying through the experience of transformation. We started out with a metaphor beautifully delivered to us from the Akashic Records of chrysalis, the experience, that alchemical experience of transformation that a caterpillar goes through in order to become a butterfly. We received a beautiful message of embodiment. We got to feel what it was like to be the caterpillar, all the fear the caterpillar held in the lead up to the inevitable breakdown of self, and then the emotions of re-emergence, rebirth, what it felt like for this creature to be born anew. It was a really beautiful message. So if you want to check that out, that is the episode, The Alchemy of Transformation. That led to last week's episode, The Dark Night of the Soul, because upon reflection, the act of chrysalis, that physical breaking down of matter, held a deep meaning and correspondence with the experience of human dissolution, being the human version of chrysalis. And so in last week's episode, I explored the concept of the dark night of the soul from a spiritual context and also a really human context. I drew on my own experience of my recent long dark night of the soul. I shared my own journey of transformation and all of the emotions that came with it, the really deep emotional journey of basically hitting a point of rock bottom where I'd completely lost myself. So having moved through that journey of going deep into the void, deep into meeting one's truth, I was left last week at the point where I realized that only I could save myself. Only I could provide the love and peace and care that I needed to transition upwards and outwards out of that state of really low vibration and really difficult emotions. At that point, I realized it was time to save myself from the darkness and to seek the light. And so today I want to talk about how I did that. I did that through a process I call self-devotion. And I feel like it's a really valuable thing to share with you all. If you happen to join me on my Crystal Aura Tarot live stream for the recent Taurus lunar eclipse, you might have heard me talk about it there. And people seemed really interested in this concept. It seemed like a kind of just natural thing to me that most people would do when they get to that point. But it struck me that perhaps not everyone would turn their healing journey into a practical kind of step-by-step process. And for that reason, I feel like it's a really good time to share this now after having shared my experience of the dark night of the soul. Because as I mentioned, what happened after I hit that point of realization of where I was a yearning to feel a different way, a rekindling of a desire to have hope in my life and feel happiness and to feel the light. And I guess I'm quite a practical person in a lot of ways, and also a creative person. My previous career was leading production of teams building mobile apps and software and big projects, basically. So I've always been able to take a vision of something and break it down into a way that it can be created, it can be built, it can be achieved, it can be manifested. I'd kind of lost my magic with that while I was in this dark place. And so I guess I defaulted back to my old skill set of creating a plan for myself, a practical plan of tasks that I could do every day to reestablish structure and to set me back on the path of achievement and attainment and feeling more like myself, I guess, now that I had a better idea through this really painful process of who I actually was. It was time now to kind of like make that tangible in my own reality, project my actual truth out into my world. It didn't even have to go further than my four walls, but it was really important that I found ways to start living in my authenticity. And so creating this practice of self-devotion was the way I started to do this. And it was very powerful. It was very effective. And it's something that I'm actually led back to now, having gone through this process recently through this eclipse season of revisiting so many feelings that I was dealing with during that dark night of the soul. I think one of the reasons that I've been experiencing this powerful eclipse energy in this way, having these patterns re-emerge around how I was feeling then, the energies reminding of where I was in that time and what I needed to do to navigate out of it, is because I've slipped back into some of those old patterns of apathy, of boredom, of, I guess, weakness, like a lack of will, because it's time for me to refresh my own self-devotional practice. It's time to reestablish that for myself. So this has actually been a really enjoyable process putting together this episode today, because it's really reminded me of the importance of maintaining this practice ongoing and evolving it to meet my own evolving desires, evolving needs, because transformation doesn't stop. It's a constant process. Change is a constant in our worlds, in our bodies, and it's something that we need to flow with. So in the spirit of flow, I'd like to share with you my journey of self-devotion. So there were a lot of factors that influenced my path to self-devotion. I've shared my experience of going through that dark night of the soul, but it involved a few other aspects. So there was obviously a spiritual crisis there. There was a crisis of identity. There was an experience of mental and emotional breakdown, which was really intense, and left me feeling very unmoored. And then there was physical illness, which I now understand to be causing a lot of that mental and emotional instability, but also the outer manifestation of what was happening inside me. So this physical illness caused me a lot of turmoil and in all layers of my being, but it was also the catalyst for change. At the point where I couldn't take it any longer, feeling so fatigued, feeling so drained, feeling so listless, and feeling so out of control emotionally, that was a turning point for me when I finally received a diagnosis of my physical issues, an understanding that empowered me to decide to make change. And depending on your journey through the dark night, you might be dealing with illness, but there could be other catalysts or turning points, other triggers that get you to that point of rock bottom where you're like, I can't take this anymore. I need to change something. I'm going to do it. This could be a rock bottom of addiction. This could be gaining a new understanding of a trauma or wound that you're carrying and that you finally feel ready to kind of deal with that. We all have different journeys, but this one is mine. And so all of these things led to me having, as I've mentioned, just a complete and utter loss of self. I was riding these waves of rage and then despair, just interchanging on a roller coaster. It was crazy and also such a foreign feeling because I'm not an angry person normally. This was part of that complete emotional instability, but it was also incredibly draining for my whole system. I was experiencing a deep depression that wouldn't shift. I obviously felt extremely disconnected from my previous identity, from my old self, which led me to isolate from my family and friends, both physically and emotionally. So there was distance placed between us. So I actively placed physical distance between myself and my family and friends. But then there was also an emotional distance there too. This journey, because it went on for years, led to a total loss of confidence. I'd previously been quite a confident person with a lot of self-belief, and I lost those things through this journey. So it was at this point where I had the realization of what I'd lost and that it was important for me to build that back up. I also had lost the will to create and the will to achieve because I was lacking hope and optimism. So it's really hard to have the will to be creative and the will to set goals and strive to achieve them when you're feeling hopeless. From the physical perspective, I was lacking the energy to look after myself. I was so fatigued. It got to the point where I'd start to let myself go with really basic things like brushing my hair, for instance. And it also led me to not feel like I had the energy to even cook good food for myself. So I was eating stuff that was easy, even though I knew I was intolerant to it. So I was just making the issues worse because of this lack of energy. I'd also developed some pretty bad habits when it came to my consumption. So I was eating a lot of sweets as a way to treat myself. And I've heard other wise spiritual teachers talk about that behavior as something you do when you lack sweetness in life, that you need to find it in food, for instance. So that was quite a telling behavior. And also pacifying myself with weed. So there was a lot going on with me at that time where I'd seek reprieve through stuff that wasn't necessarily good for me. but it helped me cope. And so that was coping with my emotions, but also with some really intense physical symptoms. So there was an obvious burnout that had occurred that led to my extreme fatigue. There was also some really weird stuff going on, like rashes, elevated heartbeat, difficulty swallowing. I had a lot of anxiety. I had a lot of pain in my body, in my back, neck, joints. I was bloated all the time. I had a lot of anxiety. I had difficulty swallowing, which led to a diagnosis. And I had obvious adrenal fatigue. My nerves were just spent and I had nothing in the tank. So after tolerating all this, putting up with it, just living this way as my new normal for a good 2 to 3 years, I hit a point where I just couldn't stand to feel that way anymore. I couldn't stand feeling constantly anxious. I wanted to feel calm and peaceful in my body. I didn't understand why I was constantly breaking out in rashes and I was sick of it. I couldn't deal with the fatigue anymore. It was just getting too much. And I guess I got to the point where I realized that no one else could fix this but me. And the first step was going to the doctor to seek some help and get my throat checked out because I had that difficulty swallowing. While I was there, I also expressed concern around the mental and emotional issues I was having because I guess I had a very faint inner sense that they were linked. So I went through a process of testing and getting blood tests and scans, led to a diagnosis of an enlarged thyroid and elevated thyroid antibodies. So the diagnosis was an autoimmune thyroid disease. So I was diagnosed with an autoimmune condition at that time. It wasn't serious enough from the test results to give me any drugs. So basically what I was told from the medical perspective, there was nothing they could do. And it was all up to me to make myself feel better. I did seek the help of a naturopath after that. And she was really great because she did a full screening on me and identified kind of the core problem there. Helped me understand that my body was kind of attacking itself because of the, I want to say, energetic state it had been sustaining for so long. And basically she gave me a belief that healing was possible that I couldn't get from the doctor and I definitely didn't feel myself. And that was such a big turning point for me. It gave me the realization that I needed to heal myself and that healing myself was possible. And since the doctors didn't have a method to heal me, the naturopath was very helpful in teaching me to see food as medicine. But again, there was nothing that could fix this for me. Only I had the recipe for my healing. And I think that is such a profound discovery that applies to each and every one of us. Again, I will talk about this in depth in a future episode about self-healing, but this was such an important turning point for me. I finally had belief that I could feel better, that I could feel whole. I did everything the naturopath said. I was prescribed an extremely restrictive diet, which I followed to a T. I went cold turkey on pretty much everything that wasn't a fruit or vegetable. I immediately stopped drinking alcohol and really haven't had any since. And so this was a journey of holistic healing for me, not just the physical healing of the autoimmune condition, but this was healing at all energetic levels for me. It was physical, it was mental, it was emotional, it was spiritual. And this was the journey of developing a practice of self-devotion. And so what is a self-devotional practice? I'll be honest, I haven't really heard many people talk about it in the way I understand it. I'm sure I'm not the only one who has a self-devotional practice, but I just want to explain what this means to me. It really started with a commitment to myself because I desperately wanted to feel better. I wanted to feel lighter. I wanted to feel more life inside me. So I made this commitment to myself, a commitment to create the life I wanted to be living, a commitment to attaining the state of being I desired. And so for me, this meant a complete lifestyle overhaul. It meant establishing a daily schedule to provide myself with some structure. And it was a ritualized practice. So I was creating ritual out of devoting myself to my healing and uplifting my spirit. I was so committed to those goals, healing and uplifting my spirit. And so self-devotion, I want to be very clear, is different to self-care. I see self-care as something that's lovely, but not always that helpful, honestly, when you're trying to navigate out of a state like this, even if you're just trying to navigate out of burnout. Self-care can be quite passive for good reason. You know, we don't celebrate rest in our society, in Western culture. So self-care allows us to prioritize rest and relaxation. But so often it's about consumption. And I will come back to this point later on in this episode. But I just want to make that distinction early on now, that it wasn't about relaxation, nor was it about consumption. It was about commitment, it was about action, and it was about attainment for me. This is a very active practice. So once I had this diagnosis and I had a plan from the naturopath, it was really up to me about how I redesigned my lifestyle to support my healing goals. So the first thing I did to really redesign my life was sit down with a sketch pad. I do this often. I have a dedicated space I do this in, where I have markers in every color you can think of and a huge visual diary, and I will map out parts of my life that I want to improve. And so this was a really powerful activity that I would revisit fairly regularly. But in the beginning, it was a very important starting point because it allowed me to visually map the things that I wanted to experience and feel in my life and those that I no longer wanted to experience and feel in my life. So it was a real kind of organizational process of casting out what I no longer wanted, what no longer served me, of releasing and shedding those things. And it was an active practice. So once I mapped out, and I used the system of the vortex taught by Abraham Hicks. Abraham Hicks is a guide, an energetic guide, channeled by a woman called Esther Hicks. And Abraham has some amazing teachings about manifestation. And the particular one that I love using is the vortex. So it's really simple. A vortex is an energetic spiral. So if you think about yourself at the center point, anything within your vortex, once it's in your vortex, will be brought closer to you, will become your reality. So it's really important what you allow into your vortex and what you keep outside of your vortex. So I used that visual to map out the things that I wanted in my life going forward and those that I no longer wanted in my life. This was feelings, this was activities, this was priorities, this was lots of different things. And so once I had a list, a visual list of what I wanted to actively cast out and what I wanted to prioritize, I then started to design daily and weekly rituals for myself that would bring me into alignment with my goals and how I wanted to feel. This was the creative and fun part because there was so much that I deprioritized for so long or felt like I wasn't up to energetically. And this small amount of empowerment really gave me the self-belief I needed to get started. And what motivated me was imagining that after I do these activities, I'll feel so much better. So my rituals were kind of organized by different groupings. The first one was food. So I decided that it was really important for me to reframe what eating was for me, what role food played in my life. So feeding became an act of nurture for my body, my mind, my emotions, and my spirit. Obviously, a nutritious anti-inflammatory diet was super important for my physical healing. So this included removal of gluten, dairy, meat, sugar, alcohol, caffeine, and even weed. Cold turkey on all of them. And really, I needed to do that to commit to myself that this was my new way of life, my more healthy way of life. And when it was hard, I'd remind myself of how I felt when I was eating poorly, basically, in a way that was making me sick. And to actively choose this new way of eating for my betterment, for the betterment of myself, my whole self. There was a group for movement. I'd become incredibly immobile and lazy and unfit. So movement was important for improving my basic fitness, but it was much more important than that to me. It was all around building physical strength, because with physical strength comes increased confidence. It was also just as important to restore an energetic flow within my body, to remove energy blocks, to work through energy and restore some more vitality through movement, reigniting my will and more of the fire energy that I was lacking. And just getting my body also used to fluid movement as a daily practice. Obviously, healing practices were super important here, so I ritualized these as well. Food was a part of my healing, but I also had to keep up with medical appointments. I was getting regular checks on my hormone levels just to see how I was tracking. I was undertaking liver cleanses and working with yoga and also flower essences as energetic healing modalities. Mysticism was a really important part of my self-devotional practices. So first of all, just turning all these activities into ritual was the first step. But then I really wanted to also prioritize activities that would help to open up my psychic abilities, deepen the trust in my intuition, activate more of my cognizance and clairaudience, and practice new ways to access my inner wisdom. Stimulation was really important to me because I was in such a state of apathy and boredom that I was really yearning for intellectual and creative stimulation. So I wanted to make sure there were activities that helped to stimulate my mind and my creative flow. Embodiment was important for me. I mentioned yoga, so this was the main practice, but really in doing that, I wanted to feel my spirit as part of my body instead of being separate to it. I was feeling very dense in my physical self and in that sense quite detached. So it was important for me to bring my kind of spirit and body back together in an act of strength and flow rather than just being this like heavy shell that caged my spirit. I wanted to allow my body to help my spirit feel free. Beauty, interestingly, upon reflection, was a really important aspect here. Everything had become so grey. So I really wanted to restore a sense of beauty in life and therefore in myself. So that was another thing. So I actually incorporated a beauty ritual into my self-devotional practice. And lastly, consistency. I really needed some structure. I had all this time. This was all happening with COVID when we're all at home with all this time on our hands without work. So I actually really needed some structure just to help get stuff done, to get myself back on the path of achievement. And I really did want to push myself to be consistent because it was so easy to make excuses for not doing stuff. So I really wanted to commit to consistency as well. So let's talk about my routine now that you understand the kind of areas that I'd prioritized. I had a daily routine that I'd update every morning, and I also had a weekly routine. So on a weekly basis, I would devote one day, as many hours as it took, to prep my food for the week. I'd never really been a food prepper before. I kind of always have enjoyed cooking. I'm very intuitive with my cooking. I don't like following recipes, and I'd always found it to be a fairly creative practice. But during this time, I lost all passion for cooking, along with many other hobbies that I really used to love. So much of that was because I lacked the energy to cook at meal times, which just led me to take easy options. So food prep was super important for me to manage my energy levels. So usually it was a Sunday. I would cook as many meals as I could. And it wasn't full meals. It was like components of meals to make it super easy for myself and to kind of create variety where I could mix and match different things. And my goals here were to eat really well, but mostly provide myself with intentional nourishment, because nourishment's so important. We are temples, so nourishment was a high priority for me. Obviously, this is in alignment with my recommended diet, and I made it as interesting as I could, but I really actually started to enjoy the food I was making and look forward to these days of cooking, because it made me so happy to not have to think about making food for 5 days after that. And it also saved me time during the week so that I could focus on my prioritized commitments, the other aspects of my self-devotion practice. And so then on a daily basis, I prioritize my morning time so that I would get my to-do list done as early in the day as possible. I also had a really bad habit of sleeping really late, so that was something that I wanted to break and start my day earlier. So I committed to waking, I think it was like between 7 and 8 a.m. normally. It also allowed me to have very quiet time. It's a very quiet time, that time of day. Now, something that was super important to me was to have a dedicated space to conduct these activities. So I converted a spare room into a comfortable space for yoga, for meditation, and for mystical practices. And this was where I would commune each morning. And I call this space my temple. So I'd enter my temple and I'd check my whiteboard, which had the list of each activity, and I'd tick them off as I went along. So it started with yoga. It started with a series of cleansing kriyas, and then I would do yoga. It started out as just yoga on Gaia, and then it turned into I joined a course that I was really lucky to be invited to, teaching Tantra. So I was practicing tantric sun salutations and breath work first thing. So I'd get my energy flowing, I'd really ignite some fire within me, and then it was time to sit down and devote myself to more mystical practices. After yoga, I would take flower essences. These were a custom blend that was made for me by a lovely angel on my path who I consulted with. It was a healing blend, specifically targeting root causes of my physical, emotional, and mental issues. So I'd make a beautiful practice of taking these drops and reciting affirmations as I did that. I'd also study flower essences. So at this time, I was really intrigued by energetic healing, by energetic medicine, and I'd had such a profound experience working with flower essences in my own healing that I decided to study flower essences and become a practitioner. So if you've heard previous episodes, you might have heard me talk about my range of flower essences flower guide. This is where it all started. I'd take my custom blend, and then I had my little kit of batch flower essences, and I would pick a different one each day and study it. So there was part of that intellectual stimulation there. After that, I would go into my Akashic records. So I'd learned how to access my Akashic records through a course, and the process of accessing my Akashic records was really fun in my ritual. It involved meditation and visualization. It involved automatic writing, and it also involved journaling, because I would be asking specific questions to do with my healing journey or things about life that I was curious about. And I would channel the answers through automatic writing into my journal and then do a bit of a reflection afterwards. So this was a beautiful practice, and it really helped develop my psychic skill set, I guess you'd say, and prepared me for reading the Akashic records of others. I had an astrology practice that I do every day. It was a daily check-in with the ephemeris. So that's the planetary movements of every day. I have a wonderful moon journal. You might be familiar with it. It's the Moon Journal by Magic of I, the astrological planner. So I'd check in with that every day and see what was happening with the planets and the moon and the sun. And as I do that, I'd study the qualities of the signs and the planets just by observing other astrologers. So I'd take little notes about the qualities of Pluto and Saturn and Mars. And I was also through that process getting familiar with aspects and other terminology, astrological terminology. So this was kind of like an astrological immersion that I'd do, 5 minutes in the morning. I'd also spend a little time reflecting on the transits and their impacts, really kind of relating to the movements of the moon, the movements in my emotional state and happenings during the day, which was pretty insightful. So this practice taught me lots about astrology. As you can see, this list is starting to get quite long, right? I would devote a good 3 hours, I would say, every morning to completing these tasks because I was devoted. So the next thing I would do was tarot. I found tarot to help me on almost a psychological level because I was so connected with my cards and I was seeking deep insight. That's exactly what I'd receive. And I also learned so much about interpreting messages intuitively with a daily tarot practice. So this involved picking a single card and drawing the card in my tarot notebook and interpreting the reading and then kind of reflecting on that reading. So again, because I was in this sort of flow state, it was almost, again, like this automatic writing that would come out. So it was a really profound way to learn about tarot, and it really allowed me to connect in with the symbols specifically. So I became quite adept at intuitive tarot reading, and it all started with this daily practice. Obviously, I'd read tarot before that, but there wasn't a deep connection until this point. And I think it's because it was teaching me about myself. And so then I'd wrap this all up with a beauty ritual. I would give myself a facial oil massage with gua sha to restore my sense of self-love, basically. Throughout my dark night and the depths of illness, I started not to recognize myself in the mirror. I started to see a different person than I used to see, and it was kind of strange. I didn't wear any makeup for a really long time, and at this point I wanted to see what would happen if I devoted some attention to myself in that way. So just by giving myself a facial oil massage every morning, how that would impact how I felt about myself. And it did help me to foster more love for myself when I looked in the mirror. So that was my morning practice. And then I had on my whiteboard a list of 2 or 3 goals that I'd write down, just basic things that I wanted to achieve that day. This could be something to do with cleaning or clearing space in the house. It could be something to do with study or business planning. It could be something in the garden, whether it's something fun or some chores or some farm work. Or it could even just be walking outside or prioritizing drinking water for the day. Stuff that was maybe one or two very attainable things, and then one that was like a little bit more challenging to kind of push myself. And then that was my morning. And it really would set me up for the day. So I know this is very detailed, but I just wanted to show you how I basically took the list of desires around how I wanted to feel and live, how I interpreted them for me into a series of tasks that I could complete on a daily basis and weekly basis that would create a practice of devotion to myself because I was prioritizing the most important things to me. Now, I want to say that depending on your goals, your list is going to look different to mine. You might take some inspiration from the activities I prioritize, those rituals that I created, but it's really just an idea of the types of devotional activities that you can do. It doesn't have to be all about prayer, and it doesn't have to be all about self-care and rest. You can be really active in prioritizing things that are important to you and that will help you achieve your goals and help you feel the way that you deeply desire to feel. But it really does take commitment and it takes action. And that's why instead of self-care, I call this self-devotion, because devotion does take deep commitment. So what was super interesting was that it didn't take long after I started doing these practices for me to feel better, so much better, for my worldview to change, for manifestations to start coming to life. So much magic happened in this time, and most of all, like a rekindling of my spirit and a rebuilding of strength and confidence that has led me to the point where I'm at now, sharing with you all in this public way. I also want to add that it doesn't have to be as lengthy or comprehensive as what I described today. Work with the time that you have. Time was one of my issues. I had a lot of time and a lot of time wasted. So to be able to fill up a big chunk of time was actually a really important thing for me to do. But I understand in this post-pandemic time where people are back at work, there's lots of responsibilities people have with their families and their jobs and stuff like that. It doesn't need to be that long. It can be 15 minutes, it can be 20 minutes, it can be 1 hour, whatever time you have. It doesn't have to be in the morning. It can be your lunch break. It can be after work. It can be at night, just before bed. It's really about identifying how you want to feel, looking at the time you have available and what kind of practical tasks you can devote yourself to doing on a consistent basis in order to attain those feelings, and designing your own program around that. But like I said, the most important parts are the commitment and the consistency here. There's one more part that's probably quite important to add in regards to devotion, that devotion often requires some sacrifice. So from my perspective, I was sacrificing sleeping in. I was sacrificing feeling comfortable. I was sacrificing eating foods that tasted nice, that gave me a bit of a buzz. I was sacrificing the lubrication I would get from alcohol. As you can see, in order to attain the feelings I desired, I did need to sacrifice some of the stuff that I was prioritizing at that time. So think about that as well. In order for you to practice self-devotion as a method of achieving your goals, the goals of how you wish to feel, and what kind of state of being you wish to cultivate for yourself, what sacrifice might be involved for you, because I think that's an important part of the commitment equation. So the things that happened to me, what I experienced after implementing this self-devotional practice for myself, was that my physical health improved. I want to say substantially. I was able to cultivate more vitality and energy. I also still honored myself when I needed rest, but it wasn't my priority. Completing these tasks were my priority every day. And the physical health wasn't in just my interpretation of how I was feeling. I get my thyroid levels checked and my antibody levels checked on a pretty regular basis. And there has been a marked improvement in those levels that the doctors don't normally see, they've told me. And it's probably because not everyone is in the place that they can do this kind of work, this kind of transformation, but many other people also don't have the will to do it. So will's really important here, and that was definitely one of my goals, to cultivate a stronger will, a will to achieve, a will to succeed, a will to take action. So even to this day, my physical health has improved, and it's allowed me to have an awareness of when my physical health is actually lacking or I'm experiencing some kind of flare-ups. Emotional wellness, huge improvement. Something that I started to see pretty quickly was less volatility in my moods, more balance, more harmony, more peace, which was really super important to me. And again, that's something that by cultivating those things, I have an awareness now of when I'm lacking peace and I'm lacking balance and I feel instability coming in. I know what to do now. Mental stimulation, that was really cool. I've rekindled a passion for learning and expansion of my wisdom and knowledge, basically, which has been really fun. My outlook on life was completely transformed. When I was in the depths of the dark night, my outlook, I would say, was probably pessimistic, verging on nihilistic. But after going on this journey of self-devotional practice, my outlook on life kind of turned upside down, and I returned to that positive and optimistic self that I've always been. My confidence has grown so much. It's still a work in progress, will always be a work in progress, probably for all of us, but it's something that I was so lacking in before this practice. And there's so many aspects to how the confidence was built. I think through physical strength and endurance, through commitment to showing up and knowing that I can do what I set out to do. The Tantra was especially useful in kind of charging up the solar plexus, that kind of center for confidence. There's a lot of really targeted work that happened there. So that's definitely something that's improved. I've increased my strength and vitality, probably lacking a little bit now. So I would say I undertook this daily practice for a good year before I started to kind of slip. So I didn't mention that, but I think that's important to say. And that's why I'm talking in past tense, because I don't have a structure like this in place right now, and I realize I'm desperately lacking it. So this is also motivating me to get back into it, because I'm missing that strength and vitality that I'd built, flexibility, all of those kind of physical things that interplay with mental and emotional self. I have enhanced my mystical gifts. I can access the state, the kind of Akashic frequency, with ease now. I don't need the kind of practices that I used to have, the longer prayers and the longer visualization and the need for lots of meditation before. I'm kind of through this practice and process that was happening daily, I've been able to kind of get familiar with the frequency of the Akasha, which is really cool. I also see much more magic in life and synchronicities. Life is so beautiful in that way. There's magic all around us. So it was a remembering of this factor, reawakening to the magic of this realm. And the magic is always popping up when synchronicities occur, which are just like frequent now in my life, which is pretty cool. A really interesting side effect of this was a physical shedding of density. So this was a literal losing of weight. This happened really quickly. I think this had a lot to do with the diet, but also I think the energetic work that I was doing allowed me to shed old weight that I was committing to let go of through this process. And that was really interesting, a really interesting physical effect. I obviously felt way better. I felt way better in my body. I felt way better in my mind, in my spirit. I felt more in control of my emotions. I just felt better all around and still do, which is really fantastic. I was able to anchor into feelings of happiness and optimism and being able to experience joy more frequently, which is great. But most importantly, I kind of began to know myself again. I started to realize myself in a truer sense, in a more authentic sense. Through this, I was able to engage in shadow work. So this isn't necessarily part of this self-devotional practice that I designed for myself to begin with, but it definitely set me up for being able to work with my shadow. And this is something that I'm going to go into next week, I think, talking about shadow work. But yeah, to be able to just understand who I was and let go of who I wasn't, that identity that I felt so tied to before and was really hard to have torn away. I was really trying to hold on to it for quite a while. But once that was gone, I really was able to meet myself again. And that was a beautiful process as well. So that's a pretty decent list of benefits, but there's plenty more. And so going back to something I left off that I mentioned earlier, the difference between self-care and self-devotion. I just want to expand on this a bit more because I think I mentioned earlier a distinction between the passive nature of self-care versus the more active nature of self-devotion. So that's really important. Self-devotion is not about relaxation so much. It's not about tuning out. It's not about saying no to stuff. It's not about buying stuff. And it's not about consumption of external content. It's not about buying takeout and a bottle of wine and watching Netflix. It's not about that. If you look at what I created all of it. There's no outsourced content there. It was all me, which I think is a really important part of it, because when we consume external content, that has an energetic impact on us. Dramatic television can really play with our emotions, with our emotional, energetic field in a way that we're sometimes not aware of. So I kind of see, even though it's really fun, I watch heaps of it, honestly, junk TV. It is just like junk food. So it's important to have an awareness of that and be aware of what we're consuming. And so while self-care, we might be tuning out, it might be fun to watch some stuff we don't have to think about and just have a laugh. Self-devotion is much more conscious consumption, and we really want to be in control of all that we're consuming and partaking in. So we don't need to buy a bunch of stuff to have a self-devotional practice. It's better if we don't, honestly, because the requirement to consume can put up barriers if you feel like you can't afford certain tools or programs. For instance, I had a really lovely moon journal. I treat myself to one of those every year, but I could easily have just used a really cheap notebook, and I did do that for my other journaling activities. Flower essences was another thing that I did purchase. However, from my perspective, they're quite affordable, but you can make flower essences on your own. It's as simple as some flowers, a bowl, the sun, and water. And if it's not flower essences you're working with, you can be working with solar charged water, completely free, requires just the sun and a glass and some water. So I did have tools. I feel like they were very affordable. There were things that I didn't just purchase for these activities. I already kind of had them around. So I tried to make it as easy as possible for myself. I wasn't denying myself these practices because I didn't have the right tools. I made do with what I had. And I encourage you guys to do that too, because it's so easy to put up barriers because we feel like we don't have the right toolkit, but there's nothing stopping us from making our own toolkit. So on that note, I'd like to thank you for joining me today. I hope my experience has inspired you to devote a little bit more time and attention and intention to yourself, to create some ritual practices in your life with whatever time you have available, as an act of honoring yourself and committing to your desires around how you want to feel and how you want to be in the world. I also hope that this pathway of transformation, this healing pathway, can provide you with some balance or inspiration if you are in a dark night right now and you're having trouble figuring out how you move through it, that when you are ready, this creativity awaits you. This empowerment awaits you. I think it's a really cool thing. If you'd like to see some visual examples of the vortex mapping, check the show notes. I'll pop an image link in there so you can see how I've used this tool in my visual mapping and goal setting. Thank you so much again for your attention today. And until next week, I wish you peace and I wish you love.